This animation is going to depict a ZW209 pressure reducing automatic control valve. A typical installation for this type of valve would be a large water user, such as a cement plant. Now, what you're going to see is the ZW209 has been fully commissioned, it's been pressurized with water, all of the air has been removed, and we're basically going to see the valve starting in action. Now, statically, we've got it set right around 55 psi. We'd already previously established a flowing pressure of 50 psi. All of the air has been bled from the valve. Quite frankly, it's commissioned and it's ready to go. When you look at the pressure gauges, you'll note that it has 100 psi static on the inlet, and again, that downstream pressure is showing about 55 psi. And that's the pressure that you would see when the valve finally closed itself off watertight. Now, what we'll see initially happening is, again, using the cement plant as the example. In the morning, when the batch mixer first fires up, it's going to start off with a small flow of water. As this flow begins, you'll see the downstream pressure drop from 55 psi to right around 50. The pilot has sensed this drop in pressure, and what it does is when it senses that, it begins to open up and it starts to flow water. When the pilot opens, the flow rate through the pilot is greater than the flow rate through the restriction fitting. Thus, water in the diaphragm chamber is evacuated, allowing the main valve to open. As the downstream pressure and flow stabilize, the flow rate through the pilot and the restriction fitting are matched. Therefore, the main valve will remain in its current position. As flow rate increases when the batch mixer calls for more water, we'll see another slight drop in downstream pressure. As the pilot senses this drop, it opens even further. And when that pilot opens further, it now allows more water in the diaphragm chamber to be evacuated to the downstream piping. Thus, the main valve will also open further. You will note that even though the flow rate is increased into the batch mixer and the inlet pressure has decreased slightly, the outlet pressure is still held relatively constant at a set pressure of 50 psi. And that's the beauty of the pilot-operated pressure reducing valve. Regardless of inlet pressure fluctuations or downstream flow rate, the downstream pressure will remain relatively constant. Now, as the batch mixer calls for an increase in water flow rate, another slight drop in pressure will occur. The pilot, once again, senses this drop and opens itself further. As it does so, additional fluid in the diaphragm chamber is discharged to the downstream piping, and the main valve opens fully, but the outlet pressure again remains fairly constant at 50 psi. The outlet pressure will remain fairly constant again, regardless of changes in flow rate and fluctuations in inlet pressure. Now, as the batch mixer calls for a lower flow rate, there's a slight increase in downstream pressure. In other words, we're not flowing as much as we were previously. When we slow that flow rate down, we'll get a slight rise in pressure on the downstream side of the valve. The pilot senses this slight increase and begins to close. As it does so, fluid is now directed to the diaphragm chamber and the main valve begins to close also. Once again, the outlet pressure continues to remain fairly constant at 50 psi. Once we get the batch mixer full, we're basically going to decrease our flow rate down to 0. The ZW209 is going to begin to move towards that closed position. What is happening is we've slowed down the flow rate, downstream pressure rises ever so slightly. Again, it diverts more water to the top of the diaphragm chamber, thus closing off the main valve. And if you'll notice on our gauges, we've gone from that flowing pressure of 50 psi back up to 55. And again, that's that additional little slight pressure needed to make sure that the valve is closed bubble tight so that we hold our downstream static pressure at a constant value and we don't creep up to line pressure.
Thank you for watching. For more information, please subscribe to our One Zurn YouTube channel. Call our customer care center at 1-855-1-ZURN and visit us at zurn.com.